Can you tell us about the moment before your Hollywood career where you were working day jobs and a voice inside of you said, this isn't right, I'm supposed to be writing?
Well, it was a little bit more complicated than that. I was a college administrator at the time, the assistant director of the Indo-Chinese Refugee Assistance Program at Long Beach Community College. And I had 18 instructors working for me and 45 student aides. But one day somebody was sick, so I had to take over their class. And I was standing at the chalkboard. We still used chalk at the time. And I was writing something on the board, and then a little voice inside my head said, "This is not the plan." I had planned to be a writer when I graduated from college. And so I decided at that time I was going to make a change in my life. And I thought optimistically that 6 months savings would be great. And so I saved up some money, and I thought I had enough living expenses for 6 months. But I quit my job, and it took me 2 years to make a living as a television writer after that.
And so you went to school in Berkeley part of the time? And then...
I did undergraduate work at Berkeley, got my degree there, spent a year abroad, my junior year at the University of Madrid. So I learned Spanish there. Then I went to graduate school at UCSD, and I was in the comparative literature program, and I wanted to do my dissertation as a novel instead of as a scholarly work. And they said no. And I said, well, but everything that I've learned would be exposed in the novel, just like everything that you learn would be exposed in your dissertation. And they said no again. And I said, well, okay, I'm leaving. And so that's when I quit school and I moved to Spain, where I felt very comfortable at the time, and started to write.
And did you feel they embraced the writer, the idea of the writer more in Spain, or just you personally felt more?
Well, I felt very at home in Spain. The situation in the States was very difficult, let's say. It's 1970. It was very difficult. There was a lot of anti-Vietnam stuff going on. The draft was there. But also I knew writers in Madrid. Some of my former professors were very well connected in the writing community. One was a very famous poet. As a matter of fact, my first published work is in Spanish, and it's a Spanish poem that I wrote when I was there in 1970.
What writers were you looking to sort of emulate, either style or even life trajectory?
Oh, that's interesting. No one's ever asked me that before. I appreciate that. You know, I was just looking up Raise High the Roof Beam Carpenters by J.D. Salinger the other day, because that title kept reoccurring in my brain. I was thinking, who wrote that? Who wrote that? Who wrote that? And it was Salinger. And I would say in my youth, that was probably one of the most influential writers. Franny and Zoe, another book of his of short stories, and of course, Catcher in the Rye. I wanted to be able to write like that.
And live that sort of reclusive lifestyle?
Didn't,
oh, okay.
No, totally opposite of that lifestyle. I wanted to live in Europe. I really enjoyed living in Europe. I traveled. By the time I went back to Spain, I had already been in maybe 20 countries around Europe and the Middle East, North Africa. So I wanted to have that kind of freedom. As a writer, you can do that. You can travel and write, and you can be anywhere in the world and write whatever you need to write. So I didn't emulate any specific writer, but I think George Orwell was another influence. And I eventually went to live in an area of London called Hampstead. And there was a cafe that I used to go to that he went to 30 years before that. So that was kind of inspiring. Now it's a clothing shop, but then it was something very interesting for me.
How loud was this voice that said, I was meant to be a writer?
It was loud. Well, I had thought when I graduated from college that I wanted to be a writer. And as a matter of fact, my father sat me down one day and said, so what are you going to do now? How are you going to make a living? And I said, well, I want to be a writer professor. I want to be a novelist, and I want to write. But And I started to write as soon as I got out of college. Actually, I started to write in college, but nothing very good. But when I got out, I started to write a lot. I can't say there was a voice after that. But I had to do a lot of different kinds of jobs to make a living. And so it wasn't until that moment at the blackboard when I said I have to put everything down and forget about making a living and just write. Because when you're working like I was working, 24 hours a day kind of job, something that was very time consuming, weekends, and people always asking me questions and me having to give them life directions because we had so many immigrants from so many different countries in the program that I was at. I just didn't have time to write. But eventually I thought, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. And this was my mid-30s. By that time, I was already in my mid-30s. I had written a couple of novels actually by that time, terrible novels. I don't want to even think about those anymore. Although I did, here's a very short anecdote. I was writing a novel about the circus. So I thought, I've got to do some research on the circus. I'd always been fascinated by the circus. I'd visited many different circuses by that time, especially in Europe, one-tent circuses, very small places. But there was a circus coming into town, Circus Vargas, which is, you probably have heard of it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a 3-ring circus under a tent.
Right.
So they had an advertisement in the LA Times looking for people to work setting up the tent. So I answered the advertisement. When I got there were a lot of other people from the employment development department there. So they had to take those people first. And I said, well, I want to do this research. So I went up to the guy that was hiring and I said, look, I will work for free if you'll let me work. And he said, okay, go ahead. And I worked till about midday when about half the crew quit because we were setting up tent in a very muddy area and people were having mud up to their ankles and they just walked away. And he said, are you going to stay? And I said, if you pay me. He said, yeah, I'll pay you. And I said, from this morning. And he said, okay. And as it turned out, after I finished the day, he said, can you come back tomorrow and tear down? And I said, sure. And then I worked the next weekend as well, setting up and tearing down. And then a year later, when they came back into town, I just showed up at the site. He said, hey, how you doing? Come on. And I started working again, obviously for pay this time.
That's fascinating.
Research is a very important part of writing, and sometimes you have to do deep research.
Did you see anything in the sort of some of the circus performers, maybe an attitude about travel or life that was infectious that you enjoyed?
Well, one of the most important things that attracted me to the circus and writing about the circus is the feeling of family that they have. The whole circus is a family. They support each other in everything. Certainly the acts, you might have 5 or 10 or sometimes even 15 people in one of the acts. They are all very, very tight. They work together. They rely on each other for their lives. So they rely on each other for a lot of things, and they always work together. And I really love that feeling of community and family. And I've written about that in several situations. And I think that's what attracted me to the circus, and that's what attracts me to a lot of other types of writing.
Have you always had an inner dialogue with yourself?
Well, there's always something going on in here. Sometimes it's in English. When I was studying Spanish, when it turned to Spanish, when I was walking down the street and suddenly I realized, hey, I'm thinking in Spanish. I thought that was fascinating. Yeah, there's always something going on. I'm always trying to be a better person. I think that's the goal of everybody. We all want to be better people. We want to be happy. We want to be comfortable, but we also want to be better as a person. I don't think I know anybody that doesn't want to be better. I don't know anybody that wants to be worse as a person. And so I guess that is, sometimes I stopped and think, was that the right thing to do? Or was there something else I could have done better? And I hope that other people think the same thing.
How did you know you were meant to be a writer? You heard this voice at the blackboard.
I don't know if I knew I was meant to be a writer. I don't know if there's anything that sets you up for that, except I spent a lot of time in the library when I was a kid. We had great libraries where I grew up. It was in Shaker Heights, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cleveland. And the suburb itself had plenty of money. So their junior high school was unbelievably well prepared in terms of the library, in terms of audiovisual equipment, in terms of a chorus room, an orchestra room, a projection room. I was on the projection crew, as a matter of fact. So I spent a lot of time going around from class to class with film. I knew how to thread a film projector from the age of 10. So I used to do that at elementary school and then in junior high school. So I knew I just felt an affinity for storytelling and watching stories and getting lost in stories. Somebody asked me the other day, what is the earliest book you remember reading and enjoying? And I remember curling up on a very comfortable chair in a library in Shaker Heights reading Dr. Dolittle. I don't know if you've ever read Dr. Dolittle, but the stories of this veterinarian and his relationship with animals. I read all the books by Laurie, I think is his last name. I can't remember his first name right now. Might be James. But in any case, I read all those books, and then I read tons of biographies. And I read in junior high school, I read 1984, I read Animal Farm, I read what else was it? Aldous Huxley's book, and I can't remember the name of it.
Brave New World?
Brave New World, thank you very much. So I was an avid reader, and I knew that I was going to have something to do with books.
How did you know you could make it work as a writer where you could make a living, support yourself?
That's an interesting question. I confronted that question just when I had that thought in my head, this is not the plan. I did a little research to see how much novelists made, because I wanted to be a novelist. And at that time, this was 1978, or no, 82, something like that. The average novelist made $875 a year. And I thought, well, if some novelists are making $1 million, most novelists are making nothing, if the average is $875. So I did a little investigation, and I found out that television writers make a good deal more than that. And I thought, well, I can write for television. If I can write a story, I can write a story for television. And that's when I started taking some classes. I took classes at UCLA Extension in writing for television. And I walked out of one class and I said, I want to be a television writer producer. And that's what I set my mind to do.
So the idea, sort of the Norman Mailer-esque lifestyle and writing may be exciting, but you knew it was rare?
Yeah, it's very rare to make a living as a novelist. Although there's other kinds of writing that was attractive to me. For example, Hunter S. Thompson and his kind of crazy stuff. I loved reading his books. I wanted to write like that, but at that time I couldn't. But I've slowly moved towards a more open style. And if you read my books, my novels now, you can see that there's a very open and conversational style. I was talking to my attorney today. He's been my showbiz attorney for 30 years. And he had read my book, and he said, I like the way you talk to yourself in the book and talk to the reader in the book, even though I'm not talking directly to the reader and I'm not talking directly to myself. The book is called Lies, All Lies, but you'll see it's set in the sitcom world of pre-pandemic, just the year before the pandemic, 2019. And it relies a lot on my experiences in that world. So I guess you could say that I was thinking that I wanted to live a decent life. I wanted to live a free life, and writing was the way to do that.
What are the 7 points of story structure found in every great movie?
All right, I'm glad you asked that question. It's a funny thing. Writers, when they first started writing movies, sometimes relied on the basic structure that Aristotle pointed out for plays 2,500 years ago. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. But movies have evolved a little bit more so that they have found a definite structure that works for just about any kind of movie. Now, there are two different kinds of structures that have been employed in movies. One is the 7-point structure, and the other is a 12-point structure. I'll go into that a little bit in a second. The 7-point structure is, first you write about ordinary life of the character, so we get to meet the character and see who that person is and see why that person needs to change, because movies are about a character going through a journey of change. The second point is the inciting incident. This is something that happens from the outside to the character and compels them to make a decision eventually, that they know they need to make a change. The third point is at the end of Act 1, when something happens to your character again, that forces him to make that decision, to have a goal and a plan. Now, we see this in every Hollywood movie, not every movie, because a movie made in France or Greece or Germany doesn't necessarily follow this. But, they're still successful in another way. Then the first part of Act 2 is your character's trying to achieve his or her goal, but there are many barriers to that goal. But at the midpoint of the movie, which is the fourth point, sometimes called the turning point, your character realizes something about himself or herself and realizes, I've got to overcome this on the inside of me. And also, maybe what I was trying to achieve, the goal I was trying to achieve, is not really what I need to do, it's what I wanted to do. Now I have to figure out what I need to do to be the person that I want to be. And so the character, the character changes or wants to change, and the action changes, and we're aiming towards a new goal. However, because 9 out of 10 times, because of the character's flaw or fault or whatever you want to call it, his character shortcomings, he or she finds himself in a position where he's never going to reach the goal. It's the low point. It looks like, and it's always about the goal. It's not somebody's mother died or he broke his leg or whatever. As long as it doesn't interfere with his goal, it's not a low point. But if it interferes with the goal, which is trying to get the need accomplished, well, that's the low point. It's the all's lost point, is sometimes called. But then something comes along, and that's the fifth point. Something comes along after that that reminds the character of what his or her goal should be. It could be just seeing a photograph of his mother. It could be his best friend saying, get off the ground and get going. You really need to do this. It could be society saying, we have to change the world and you have to be the person to do it. Whatever it is that comes along that reminds this person of what his or her goal was. And he now reinforces himself, prepares himself for the final challenge. And the final challenge is point number 6. Sometimes people call that the climax. I call it the final challenge because this is the biggest attempt to overcome whatever it was that's been preventing him from reaching his or her goal. And then he wins that final challenge because it's an American film. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a happy ending, but he wins the challenge. Like in Gladiator, he wins the challenge, but he dies. But he does achieve his goal, which is to reunite with his family. That was the most important part of the goal. So in the 7th point is the now changed forever life of the central character. So we see him appreciate having reached the goal. Now there's another way to organize a film, and I'm not going to go through all those 12 points, but that is the mythical way, or the way that,
Joseph Campbell.
Thank you. The way that Joseph Campbell outlines it in his books. And that is used in Star Wars. It's used in Lord of the Rings. It's used in a lot of those kind of adventure movies where your character has to go through many challenges and many different stages to reach his goal. But if you take the 7-point structure and lay it on Star Wars or even on Wizard of Oz, which is also works on a 12-point structure, then you find that it works perfectly as well.
What is one of your favorite films where you've really dissected the 7 points?
Well, one film that works really well for the 7 points is Thelma and Louise. It's a beautifully structured film. It's a great film. Another film that works really well is In and Out. It's with Kevin Kline. It's got the most beautiful midpoint that you could ever imagine. Kevin Kline is doubting whether or not he's gay or straight by this time. And he's riding his bicycle and comes to a crossroads. What could be more, choice point? And he falls at the crossroads. He has an accident.
Right.
Falls
Okay.
at the crossroads, and he has to decide which way to go. And at that crossroads, he realizes that he has to come to grips with being gay. So that's his need. His want was to get married, but his need is to realize what his sexuality really is.
I'm hoping we can clarify more about the midpoint.
Sure.
When the character goes from want to need.
This is probably the hardest point for new writers to deal with, because they don't think that they need to go from one thing to another. They just think that the character should have a goal and should be trying to achieve that goal. Now, in some movies, and I have to admit that in some movies, some action movies, there is no change. Sometimes even in a comedy, there's no change. But most of the time, somebody realizes at the midpoint that they're going down the wrong road. Or maybe that they were chasing after the treasure, but they realized that the true treasure is family. And so that is their need. So they were going for what their want was treasure, but their true treasure is the need of the family. So the midpoint is something that not only spins around that story, that is to say, the central story of the movie, but it spins around the other two stories that are going on at the same time. And that is of the personal development of your character, so that he becomes a better person or she becomes a better person. And then there's another story that is in every good movie, and that is the central emotional relationship story. So sometimes called the love interest. So if somebody is pursuing somebody or trying to fix or create a relationship with somebody, at the midpoint, they realize they've been going at that in the wrong way, and they need to make some changes in order for that to happen. So the midpoint is something that if a writer hasn't worked it out before they sit down and write it, they're going to have some trouble. But if they get to that point and they realize that they're in the wrong place or they don't know where to go next, that's when they have to figure out what the real need of that character is.
How does the 7 points factor into your writing process?
Well, that's an interesting question, because what I usually think of when I'm writing, most times I come up with a character, but I know I have to figure out what is the character's issue. And then I stop and think, well, if he's got this issue, how is he going to deal with that issue? And that's when I start to write the 7 points, because I think that comes before writing almost anything else. I usually write the very short bios of the characters that I have in mind, only 3 or 4 sentences, the physiology, the psychology, the sociology of the character. But then I figure out, well, what is the character doing now? What's the character's flaw? Because that's the most important driving point of the character. What is the character's flaw? What is he going to have to do to overcome that flaw? Why does he have to overcome that flaw to achieve his or her goal? So I figure out what is the character's ordinary life. And I just write that in 1 or 2 sentences. Then I figure out, well, what's going to make him change? What's going to happen from the outside that's going to make him change? And then I write that point. And then I figure out, well, what's he going to do about that? And that's the goal and the plan. And then I figure out, well, what's going to make him turn around at the midpoint to realize what's really going on, what he really needs to do. And so I write 1 or 2 sentences about that. And then I figure out, well, how does he screw up? And how does that bring him down and make a low point for him? And then I figure out, how does he bring himself back up and face the final challenge? And I write a couple of sentences about that, what that final challenge might look like. And then I figure out, well, how's it going to be after that? What's his life going to be as a normal person again? Or is now changed forever normal life? And then the process follows after that. Then I generally like, if I haven't already written bios for everybody, I do usually a full-page bio for each central character. That would be the protagonist, the antagonist also deserves a bio, and the central emotional relationship, and anybody else that is important, maybe a catalyst of some sort. I write those bios, then I write a beat sheet. And I stop and figure out, with the 7 points in mind, what are the beats that lead from each point to the next point.
I think you've said too that the physiology, the sociology, and the psychology is very important in that it's also based on how other people perceive that character,
Right.
and then that person reacts based on that. I thought that was fascinating.
That's correct.
I heard you talk about that.
Yeah. This is not something that I invented. Lajos Egri, the Hungarian theater critic, wrote in Art of Dramatic Writing that these are the ways that you construct a character. He said, character is the most important thing to know when you're writing a play. And I think that's the most important thing to know when you're writing a film as well. And that's why the flaw is so important. That's why the physiology of the character, because a character, let's say a character is my height, but weighs 300 pounds. You have a different way of looking at the world when you're like that. Let's say the character is 4 feet tall. You have a different way of looking at the world. If you're 7 feet tall, you have a different way of looking at the world. And the world looks at you in a different way. So you have to act accordingly. And so you have to direct your character according to that. And then there's the sociology of the character, where he or she was born, where they learned their language, what language did they learn, how many languages did they speak, what their family was like. Was it a mother and a father and 2 children, or was it a father and a father and 3 children? Was it a mother and a mother? Was it just the mother, just the father? Was it the grandparents? Knowing that kind of background is important for your character. Knowing where they went to school, what they learned in school, what they studied after school, and what kind of occupations they've had, what kind of jobs they've had, where they live now, where they lived before. All those things are the sociology of the character. And then there's the psychology of the character. Is this person a happy person by nature? A sad person, a depressed person, doesn't care person, doesn't even think about it? Is it a stoner? Is it not a stoner? Is it an alcoholic? All those things are very important in developing the character. So you see, if you write bios and you use those 3 guidelines to write a bio, you'll know who your character is. And knowing who your character is helps you write the story, but also helps you write the dialogue. Because if you know how your character thinks, because of his background, his physiology, his sociology, his psychology, then you'll know what he's going to say. And if you know what he's going to say, you don't have to struggle over dialogue. It'll come to you. The character will speak through you. And that is a great moment when that happens.
And lastly, you said something fascinating that I wonder if it lent to your time working at the community college, in that if they come from an immigrant family, was it a traditional sort of upbringing, or did they stray from that?
Right.
Does that would have implications as well?
A huge implication. Yeah, I've worked with hundreds, actually thousands of immigrants at Long Beach Community College, and in other places as well. I'm a fluent Spanish speaker, so that in Los Angeles, I've worked with a lot of people from other countries. And I understand some people came to this country as a part of a rebellion from their traditional upbringing. Some people came to this country because they had to, because of economics or family issues or prosecution or whatever it was. All those things have a great effect on the character. And if you're cognizant of those, if you create a character with that many conflicts and those kind of issues, then you create an interesting character. You don't want to have a completely white bread character. That's not interesting at all.
You say every movie has 4 main stories?
I would say so, yeah. The stories are, first of all, there's what we call the plot. And that is your central character going after a goal. Then there's the story of your central character dealing with whatever issues, personal issues, their flaw, how to overcome their greed or their selfishness or whatever it is or their fears, whatever it is that's inside of themselves that's preventing them from living the best life that they could. So that's how many flaws we got there already? That's 2 or 3. That's 2. The third one is the central emotional relationship story. And that is, there always has to be a relationship that your central character has to either create or mend. And that could be between friends, it could be a father and a daughter, it could be a mother and her father, it could be a mother and her daughter, it could be cousins, it could be just classmates, it could be just new people that you meet. Whatever it is, there's a relationship that has to be created or mended. Let's say there were 2 brothers that had a fight early on in their world. Now, for some reason, they're going to have to mend that relationship in order to reach the goal, whatever the goal is. All right, so that's 3 stories. The 4th story is the story of the antagonist. We can't eliminate the antagonist from this picture. They can't just show up every once in a while to be the barrier. They have to have a goal as well. And so they're proceeding towards their own goal. Now, as it turns out, it's the flip of the plot story. So if it's the antagonist, well, the antagonist participates sometimes in the inciting incident, and we should know who the antagonist is by the end of Act 1. But the midpoint for the antagonist is sometimes a difficult point, and we have to know what that is. The low point for the protagonist is the high point for the antagonist. That's when the antagonist looks like he or she is winning, or when the volcano is going to erupt, or when the ocean is going to be too big for the boat, or whatever it is. So it's the opposite. And in the final challenge, the antagonist has got to fight and lose. Now, when you create an antagonist, you have to create that antagonist as better looking, smarter, stronger, faster, just better all around, so that your protagonist has something to fight against. Otherwise, it's too easy for your protagonist. It's not a movie. You know, the movie would be over like that if the antagonist is not a worthy antagonist.
And should you also have the protagonist's sort of Achilles heel be the antagonist's pride shining moment or strength?
Well, it could be that. It's not necessarily that, but it could be that. We have to think of the antagonist as a real person. So real people, sometimes when they come home, the dog greets them, and the dog is very happy to see the antagonist, and the wife maybe. The antagonist has to have a human quality as well. And it's not necessarily necessary that the antagonist is the opposite in personality of the protagonist. But it helps, because that way you have a real clear antagonism going on there. But let me just say one thing that applies to everything. There are no rules in screenwriting. There are guidelines, there are things to follow if you're new in screenwriting. But once you get a good grip of the rules and good control, not the rules, good grip of the ideas and the conventions of screenwriting, then you can put them aside and do what you want to do. But you will usually follow those 7 points, and you usually follow the other things, but maybe not necessarily in that order, or maybe not necessarily to those proportions. Whatever works, works. And if you've got a complete control of the genre, then you can write whatever you want to write.
When you tell that to people, or they read that in your book, is it freeing to them, or do people rebel against it? Do they want rules at times?
No, it's usually the opposite. People don't want rules, and they come into my class sometimes, and they say, well, I don't want to write it like that. I don't want to follow a formula. And I say, well, okay, you can do whatever you want to do, but I'm going to tell you that writing film is like making a car. You always have to have 4 wheels in a car. Some cars have 3 wheels, but okay. Most cars have 4 wheels. You have to have a steering wheel. You have to have an accelerator. You have to have a brake. You have to have a motor. You have to have a seat. So all those things are true, but you can have a Ferrari, or you can have a Jeep, or you can have a Bentley, or you can have an SUV of some sort. There's an unlimited number of forms for that. And you don't have to follow any specific form, but you do have to have wheels and an engine and a steering wheel and a seat. Those things have to be there. So you have to figure out how you're going to fit that into your form. And usually by that time they say, okay, well, I'm going to do it your way now, but when I'm done with your class, then I'm going to do it my way. And when they're done with my class, they do it my way anyway.
So they see that it works, because
It works.
if you're trying to put together this car and there's something missing and the carburetor's not there or something.
Not going to run.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's not going to run. So this applies. Now, some people make electric cars, and so that's been a big change. But it's still a car, still has an engine, still has all those other elements. Some people make movies like Memento. Have you ever seen Memento?
Oh, yeah.
It's backwards, but it's backwards for most of the movie, but parts of the movie are forwards. So if you remember the parts that are in black and white in the sanitarium, they move the story forward, whereas the parts that are in color move the story backwards. But if you flip it and you figure out what the 7 points are from the end to the beginning, they're all there. And they're all there in the parts that move from the beginning to the end in the black and white sections as well. So yes, it's not your average movie. It's not constructed like your average movie, but it has all those 7 points.
And you said a screenwriter should have memorized those 7 points as well.
Well, they should know what they are. Yeah, they should know what they are. You don't have to memorize anything in screenwriting, but you can refer to books and you can refer to your notes from class, or you can refer to other screenplays. You know, one of the best ways to learn how to write is to read screenplays and read many screenplays. I must, well, outside of my class, I've read thousands in my class, but outside of my class, I've read, well, probably 1,000, I would guess, at least, and seen at least that many movies. And the more you read and the more you see, the better you write.
You see, every movie has a subplot that is about the central emotional relationship. Can we go into detail about that?
Right. It's important to have a central emotional relationship, especially in a romantic comedy. That's what the central plot is about. So I'm going to get back to that in a minute, but let's talk about Wizard of Oz for a second, because Wizard of Oz is a textbook in screenwriting. You can see everything that you want to see in that movie. Relationships between the characters, the 7 points, the strong antagonist, the worthy antagonist, all those things are in the Wizard of Oz. What is the central emotional relationship in the Wizard of Oz? Well, that's an interesting question, because there's so many. This is a little bit unusual. There are so many central emotional relationships. But I would have to say it is with Auntie M and Toto. I think Toto is a central emotional relationship. And also she has relationships with each one of the characters that she goes on the journey with. You know, the Tin Man, the Straw Man, and the Cowardly Lion. So she has relationships that she develops along the way with all those characters. She started off with one with her dog, and she has to continue that one. Her relationship with Auntie M is kind of broken because she runs away because Auntie M has not given her enough support. And she runs away and looking for another place where she can be at peace with Toto, and over the rainbow, and everything could be, you know, fine. At the end, when she realizes that there's no place like home, she mends that relationship with Auntie M, and she's very happy to be with Auntie M. But we know that's been a tension point throughout the whole story. At the same time, she meets these people along the way. I'm calling them people because they're not exactly people, but they are. They represent the same characters that worked on her farm turned out to be the characters that she meets along the way. For example, the Cowardly Lion is the guy that managed the pigs in the farmyard and is scared to save her from the pigs when she falls into the pigsty. But he's the Cowardly Lion. The Straw Man is the guy who reminds her that she has to think for herself. The Tin Man is the guy that reminds her he has to have a heart. But, you know, they talk about that before we get into Oz. But when we're in Oz, those are the parts of her personality that she has to come to grips with, that she has to understand that are necessary. And so these are relationships that she has to create and mend in order to become the person that she needs to be. Because Dorothy goes from being an adolescent to being more or less an adult. That's her change, that's her journey, is to overcome all these things that she needs to overcome. The fear, she needs to have a heart, she needs to think for herself, all the things that these sub-characters are talking about, she has to learn from them. So these relationships are extremely important. Now at the same time, she has to get home. That's her main plot, that's her main story. She has to get home. But she has to learn how to be an adult along the way. And these characters, the relationship with these characters are what forms her personality in the end. And then she's able to return home and renew the relationship with Auntie M.
And what about her relationship or butting up against the antagonist?
Well, the antagonist, the Wicked Witch, is a representative of Miss Gulch, who lived down the road. That was, that shooed away her dog, that wanted to take her dog, remember? She kidnapped the dog and put it in her basket. The dog escapes, and then that's when Dorothy grabs the dog and runs. But Miss Gulch is represented by the Wicked Witch of the West. And it's the same person, just has different makeup. And that's what we see throughout this film. And her relationship with that is, that teaches her that she has to stand up to people that will not let her live the life that she wants to live, that she needs to live. People that restrict her, people that are nasty to her, people that are against dogs, people that hate dogs or whatever it is. If you stand up to them, then you can beat them. If you let them beat you down, or if you run away from them, then you're never going to live without fear. So Dorothy learns how to live without fear by standing up to the Wicked Witch.
You mentioned we were going to revisit the romantic comedy?
Yeah. Well, the romantic comedy is interesting in that it flips things around. Instead of the main plot being about achieving some sort of a goal, a specific goal, the main plot is the central emotional relationship, achieving that goal. So it's either one that needs to be mended or one that needs to be created. So let's look at Harry Met Sally. No, let's look at, excuse me, even better. Let's look at You've Got Mail with Tom Hanks and
Meg Ryan?
Meg Ryan, thank you. I'm glad you remember better than I do.
For some reason, it's just the coffee. Some days I would be stuck to. Okay.
Well, it's good. I mean, because there's so many movies in my head, I can't always pull down every name. But anyway, in You've Got Mail, each of those protagonists has got a goal. Her goal is to keep her mother's or grandmother's shop, her bookstore. His goal is to make a conglomerate of bookstores and to swallow up her bookstore. Those are goals that are now subplots instead of the central plot, which would be in a regular movie. The central plot in this movie is the central emotional relationship. So in most romantic comedies, there always has to be a subplot like that, where they're moving towards that, but at the same time, they're moving towards a relationship. Let's take His Girl Friday, which is a movie from the 30s. I think it's 1939, but I'm not sure. Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell. So her goal is to get him to stop interfering with her marriage. And his goal is to get her back. They had been married and divorced. His goal is to get her back. That's the romantic comedy goals. The subplot is to deal with this person that's been wrongly accused and is about to be hanged. So we're dealing with that, but we're also very much more concerned with the relationship story. So romantic comedies deal with relationships, but there's always something else going on that's driving a story as well. Whereas in other kind of a movie that's plot-driven, the subplot is the central emotional relationship.
How does a writer figure out what their story's about? What steps do they take?
First of all, we have to talk about what we mean by what the story is about. If I say the story is about the Grand Prix in Long Beach, that's one thing. If I say the story is about somebody overcoming his fear of driving, that's another thing. If I say the story is about good defeats evil, that's another thing. And the way I look at movies is the last one. It's proving a premise, what Laios Egri calls premise. It's not the same thing as the rest of Hollywood calls premise. The rest of Hollywood calls it's about the Grand Prix, that's a premise. But what Egri says is love conquers all, even death. That's the premise. Greed creates destruction. That's a premise. So looking at those things, that's what the movie is about. Once you decide what the movie is about, then you can kind of figure out who needs to be in that movie, who's the character that's going to help you prove that premise, and then what is the story that's going to help you prove that premise. Now you can go the other way around. There's so many ways to approach a movie. One is by deciding what your premise is and deciding who's going to fit that premise and deciding what the story is. Or you can decide who the story is about and what the premise is that you need to prove and how you're going to go about doing that, what they need to achieve. Or you can go about saying, well, I want to reach the treasure on Treasure Island, whatever that is. Who needs to do that? Well, maybe a pirate. And what is the goal? Maybe avarice creates destruction is the premise of the story. So you can start anywhere, character, story, premise, whatever you want to start at, but you're always going to have all those three things in your movie to make it work.
And I guess it would apply to any genre or types, whether it's a Hollywood tentpole, whether it's an art house cinema,
Yes.
foreign film, doesn't matter?
I think they apply to all types of film, but not every country has the same kind of view. Although, because Hollywood was so almost a monopoly of film in the 20s and 30s around the world, everybody saw those films and everybody saw that approach to making film. Most people around the world respond better to Hollywood films than they would, say, a German film, or even an Italian film, or a Greek film, or an Indian film. Although I love all those films. I mean, the Apu trilogy by Satyajit Ray, fantastic set of films. Shoot the Piano Player, a French film, fantastic film. Does not follow the 7 points exactly, does not follow a lot of other things, and he gets shot. Somebody commits suicide. Or Jules et Jim, you probably remember Jules and Jim, a French film from the 60s, I believe it was. Does not follow the paradigms that I'm talking about exactly. But there's a lot in there that is very Hollywood, but there's a lot in there that is not. But they're still valuable films to look at and to see that, well, if I want to do a different kind of film, maybe I want to do it that way. As I said before, there's no one way to make a film. And you want to see something different, but you still need to have the four wheels, the steering wheel, the accelerator, the brake.
Do you hate beat sheets?
No, as a matter of fact, I think beat sheets are required. I always write a beat sheet. Sometimes I skip a treatment. I mean, it depends on if I'm writing for money, somebody's paying me to write, I still will write a beat sheet, then I will write a treatment because that's the only part you get paid for. You don't get paid for a beat sheet. And then I turn in the treatment, then I get the go-ahead to do the script, et cetera, et cetera. If I'm writing for myself, sometimes I'll skip the treatment, but I always write a beat sheet. Beat sheets are necessary because you need to know where you're going before you set out on your journey. So if you go to the airport and you don't know where you're going, you have a passport, and you just walk onto the first plane that you see, you might end up on a desert. You might end up in a communist country. You might end up in a war zone. You might end up on a beach in the Bahamas. You never know where you're going to go. But if you know where you're going to go, if you have a general plan, you're going to end up someplace where you're going to be happy. Now, the same thing is if you have a general plan when you're writing a movie, if you have your 7 points and you link those 7 points with beats, then you know where you're going to go when you start writing your script. If you start writing your script and you don't have that planning, you write yourself into a corner, and then you don't know how to get out of it. Now, when I was teaching at UCLA, They have a 10-week course called 434 for graduate students in the MFA program. And you have 10 weeks to write your film from start to finish. That's a lot, and it's a fast way to write a film. But to make things worse, the first week is taken up by pitches. And so the students would pitch to you their stories, and you would choose 8 students to be in your class. And they would have the opportunity to choose which professor they want to be in. So the head of the department would figure out which students would belong in which class. And so you basically the first week. And then you only have 9 weeks to do it. So then I would make my students write the bios in the first week, and then write the 7 points in the second week. And then, or actually the second week, the bios. The third week would be the 7 points. The fourth week would be a beat sheet. And by the 5th week, they're saying many of the other guys in other classes are already 20, 30 pages into their script, and we're nowhere. We're never going to make it. And I said, they're going to run into problems, and you're not. Because on the 6th week, you're going to be starting writing your pages, and you'll be writing 10 or 15 pages a week, sometimes 20 pages a week, because you have the outline, you have the beats, you know where you're going, and you're not going to write yourself into a corner. And by the end of 10 weeks, they would always say, wow, we're done, but Joe there is still in the midpoint because he can't figure out where to go. And so it's very important, I think, to write a beat sheet, at least a beat sheet, and sometimes a treatment. If you're a new writer, I would say write a treatment, because that gives you an opportunity to write a complete description of each beat, so that you can visualize the film completely. And then once you have a very good treatment, say 15, 20, 25 pages, maybe 30 pages, you bring it into your screenwriting program, Final Draft or Movie Magic or whatever you use. And you can just see the paragraph, write the scene that goes to that paragraph, delete that paragraph, see the next paragraph, write the scene that goes to that paragraph, delete that paragraph, and you never get stuck. You never think at the beginning of the day, what am I going to write? I've got writer's block. It's impossible to have writer's block if you've got a good treatment, or at least a beat sheet. If you've got a good beat sheet, if you've experienced enough to skip the treatment, if you have a good beat sheet, you do the same thing. You bring it into your program and you write beat for beat. You never have writer's block. You never get stuck.
So sort of going back to the airport analogy, it's like if you told someone from a small town, hey, can you go pick up Uncle Joe from LAX? Mm-hmm. It's really easy. Just go pick him up. This is the terminal. Oh, sure. If anybody who's even from LA is scared of LAX, the loop, and you can't park certain places, so you need to kind of know all these things before you go.
Exactly.
If you go, it's not going to be very fun, and you could end up in traffic, different things. So if you play on these different things, it might be more successful.
Exactly. I mean, LAX is tough enough, and I know LAX really well. It's still tough. There's no good way to do LAX. But if you don't know what you're doing, it's going to be like Robin Williams in Rush. What is it? Something on the Hudson. Do you remember that film?
What year?
Oh gosh. Must be the 80s.
Okay.
But he's a Russian immigrant, and he's in the middle. Yes. He's in the middle of a grocery store, and he wants to get something like coffee. And there are 30 choices of coffee, and there's too many choices, and he just freezes. He can't do it. He has a meltdown. If you go to LAX and you don't know what you're doing, you can just look at it and go, I can't deal with it.
Yeah. Or if you do, you can have a meltdown.
Yeah. LAX is a bad thing. But it's the idea that if you don't know where you're going, you're not going to get there. Sure. You're going to get someplace else that might not be good.
Right. So seemingly easy thing is, oh yeah, I'll just go and, small town, it should be no problem. But something that's very complicated, analogous to this. But exactly what is a beat sheet, though? If somebody had never seen a beat sheet, what does it look like?
Okay. Well, it can be, first of all, a beat sheet is something that you never show to anybody else that you don't trust. So you never show it to the producer. If you're hired to write a film, you never show it to the producer or the director. You only show them the finished product. But the beat sheet you can show to your trusted advisors. Now, it can take many forms because you're writing it for yourself. You're writing it as a guideline for yourself. So when I write a beat sheet, I'll write a sentence or two, but sometimes I can visualize that whole scene and I will write a paragraph. And then the next beat, maybe I'll only write 2 words. He goes to the bathroom. Well, that's 3 words, or 4 words. Maybe the next paragraph, the next beat after that is something that is another paragraph. The next one is just 2 lines. So it can be whatever you want it to be, whatever guides you through the process of the film, the structure of the film. That's what a beat sheet is. What I ask my students to do is to write 2 lines, but if they get carried away and write 3 or 4 or 5 or 10, that's okay too. But at least 2 lines. A beat sheet should generally be about 3 pages single-spaced, but it doesn't have to be. It can be 5, it can be 1, it can be 10, whatever works out for you, for your story, whatever you need to write for that story, so that you have the story in a form that you can then take and write the script from, or write the treatment from, which I think is the recommended for a new writer. Definitely write a treatment. And that gives you the opportunity to stop and think, okay, I've got this beat. This person has to ride their bicycle downtown. What happens when they're riding their bicycle downtown? And I think it through, and then I write the paragraph or 2 paragraphs that I needed for that, and I write that in the treatment. Or if I'm jumping from the beat sheet to the script, I still work out the whole scene in my head, and then I write the scene in script form.
And you say we're never showing this to the rest of the production, the producer, the director?
Never, because they're going to make suggestions there based on what you have written in shorthand. And they're not going to understand what you've written in shorthand. If I write something like he rides his bike downtown, they're going to say, well, why does he ride a bike? Why is he going downtown? What happens on the way downtown? Whereas I know exactly what happens, and they use it, well, no, take the bike out, make them take the bus downtown. No, it's important to ride the bike. So you get in an argument where you shouldn't be getting in an argument yet. Later on, you can get into a discussion about why he took the bike downtown instead of the bus. There's a reason for that. I don't know what the reason is right now, but there's a reason for that. And you have the reason, but you don't want to have to explain everything, every point. And if the beat sheet is so condensed that not everybody's going to understand what's in it, it's hard to show to other people. Now, you can show it to people that understand beat sheets or understand you as a beat sheet writer, and you can talk with them. And I call those people trusted advisors. Now, I do that in my class, and I have them share in my class, because we all understand what the beat sheet is according to me. And the beat sheet has 3 elements in it. Each beat has 3 elements. Who's there, where they are, and what's the conflict. So each beat should have those things in it, and my students understand that, and they are able to discuss, okay, I understand where they are, but why is it only him there? Why isn't he with somebody else there? It would be better if he were talking to somebody rather than having a monologue there. So you can get into those kind of questions with your trusted advisor. But if you do it to a producer, they're going to want to impose their ideas on that script before they even know what it's about. So it's not a good idea.
And then each beat should have conflict, you say, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up. So the 3 elements, the 3 things that we need to know about is who's there, where they are, and what the conflict is. So the conflict is the central issue of every scene. If there's no conflict in the scene, it's not a scene. It's leading up to a scene, or it's leading away from a scene, but it's not a scene. So each beat should be a scene, so it should have the conflict, should be clear. What is happening in that scene? Now, as long as we're talking about conflict, we should talk about what the beats represent. If the beat does not move the story forward or tell us something about the central character, then we don't need that beat. If it's just a funny scene, but it doesn't move the story forward, sometimes they'll let it in a comedy, but most times they won't. They'll cut it if it doesn't move the scene, if it doesn't move the story. If it doesn't tell you something new about the central character or the antagonist possibly, then we don't need it. It doesn't help us. We can take it out. We can have it, the story will flow without it. And that's how you figure out if we need that scene. If we take that scene out, we're not sure about that scene, we take it out, and the story still flows without it, then we don't need that scene. If we take it out and the story does not flow, if there's something missing, then we put that scene back in, but make sure we add conflict in that scene. Otherwise, it doesn't hold you. If there's no conflict, you're not held by that scene.
So just a scene where the main character's riding their bike downtown and the birds are chirping, beautiful blue sky, that's not enough. We have to be where maybe
there's a pothole.
Okay, or someone asks for a ride on the handlebars.
Right, or somebody jumps in front of them, or a car cuts them off, or something happens. Right. At least something, there's something that you jump at. In a very soft scene like that, we have to have something that motivates him. Like the scene in and Out, when he's riding on that road, he has a crash. And then the conflict starts. He starts the conflict with the Tom Selleck character, and they have their discussion about, being gay.
Why do you say that we can't discuss character without discussing structure?
That's an interesting question. I have to think about that for a second. We can discuss character without structure, but we can't discuss a movie without structure. So a character, if the central issue of every movie is the growth of the character. So how the character grows is structured. And so that's how they're interlaced. So if we understand how the structure works with the character and the character works with the structure, then we understand what the process of the movie is going to be. So the character overcoming a flaw and overcoming a barrier to his goal, that's what creates the structure of the movie. So they can't be torn apart for a movie. I mean, you can build a character without a movie, but you can't build a movie without a character.
You say that we go to the movies to see character, that we want to see people, we want to see people go through changes and fight against all odds?
Mm-hmm. The first reason we go to movie is to feel something. And the only way we can feel something, feel sadness, feel joy, feel laughter, feel fear, the only way we can feel that is if we can identify with somebody on the screen. If it's just a rock falling down onto a mountain, we don't feel fear unless we see somebody about to be hit by the rock. If we can see a rocket going to the moon, but we don't feel anything unless we know there's somebody in the rocket that might get lost or might hit the moon by accident or go off course. So if we don't see a character, we don't want to go to the movies. If we don't get a feeling from the movie, we don't appreciate the movie. So this is one of the things that sometimes you will watch a movie and you'll just have no feeling at all. And you'll walk out of the movie and say, what was that about? I don't understand. Why would I want to go see that movie? But if you see a movie, even if it's not very well done, but if the emotion is there, if we see that person going through a problem and solving the problem, if we see that person having fear, if we fear for that person's life, then we like that movie because we felt an emotion in that movie. And that's because of the journey of the character.
I think you've said we don't even necessarily have to like the character.
Correct.
It could be somebody that's not really likable to our personal taste.
Right.
But if we're invested in that journey?
Well, if we're fascinated by that character. For example, let's look at Godfather 2. We have Michael Corleone. He starts off being a pretty sympathetic character, but he turns into a monster. He'll kill and do whatever needs to be done to maintain his family, two families, his real family and his mafia family. He'll do whatever he needs to do that. And by the end, he's despicable. I mean, he'll kill people just because he has to. He thinks he has to maintain power. So we don't like him, but we're fascinated by his process and by the way he deals with people and the way he manipulates people and the way he's able to kill people and think he has a good reason for doing so. So a fascinating character can be enough for us to be in the film. We don't like Freddy in Nightmare on Elm Street, but we're fascinated by Freddy. What's going on with that character? Horror movies are a good example. We don't like everybody in a horror movie, but we have to empathize with the person that's on the receiving end of the horror. We have to understand, we have to like that person. But the main character really in a horror movie is the person that's perpetrating the horror. And that's the person that we have to be fascinated by. At least that's my view of horror movies. I'm not a great fan of horror movies, I have to tell you, because I don't like that kind of violence for no purpose, except to scare people. So people like to be scared. That's why they go to horror movies. They like to feel fear in a safe place. That's a weird thing to say. Feel fear in a safe place. That's why people like roller coasters. People like roller coasters because you can feel fear going over the hill, but you know you're safe. You're okay, but you're scared. But you're okay, but you're scared. So that's the kind of feeling that people like to see in a horror movie. And that's why we go to horror movies. We like to feel fear. On the other hand, if you're a teenager, you like to squeeze the person next to you. So that's part of the deal.
Sure. And that can be scary depending on who's sitting next to you. But
exactly. Yeah. If you know them or not.
Yeah, exactly. But I know you said we're fascinated by certain characters, whether we like them or not. I was thinking of The Devil Wears Prada, and then you mentioned that you loved Salinger. Mm-hmm. So there's My Salinger Year, where Sigourney Weaver plays this wonderful book editor. And hard as nails, moody, you can't read her. It's fascinating. And J.D. Salinger is their top client. I don't know if you saw the movie.
No, I haven't
seen
that.
Okay. So again, wonderful. Yeah, it's so great with Margaret Qualley. And so again, not able to pin down the character, don't necessarily like the person, but love watching their different dynamics.
Right. It's fascinating. If a character is really interesting, we're interested in that movie. So a character has to be either likable or interesting. If they're not, if they're all villains, we're not going to like it. So you always have to have somebody we root for, even if we don't really like them, especially. And throughout most of The Godfather Part 2, we root for Michael Corleone, even though he starts out as a killer. He kills people. But he said, I was in the army, I killed people. Now I'm killing people for a different purpose. It's an interesting point of view.
Sure. The first part of the movie is to find out what is wrong with this character or with this character's life?
The first part of the movie is to get to know this character in his or her world, so that we see how this character needs to change for some reason, whatever it is. And we usually get an idea what the flaw is. The best movies will show you this character's flaw in the first 5 minutes visually. So if the character is greedy, we see that in the first 5 minutes visually. We don't see somebody saying, hey, you're greedy. That's not going to give us enough information. But if we see that person acting in that way, then we understand what that person's flaw is. But we also have to see something that makes us either interested in that character or like that character. And that's why I can't remember his name, Blake, whatever it was.
Oh, Save the Cat?
Save the Cat. That's why he wrote Save the Cat, because there's always a moment in the first 5 minutes where the character does something that we say, oh, I like that guy, or why I'm really interested in that guy.
Sure. I could think about, let's say, if we were going to see a greedy character, let's say maybe they lived in a New York City high-rise, and maybe they always pass their doorman, and the doorman's, hey, how are you, Mr. So-and-so, or whatever, And then one day he gives them a Christmas tip. So we go, okay, he can't be that bad.
Right.
Hey, I got 5 kids at home, and then, so he gives it to them. But normally we see this guy stiffing waiters on their tips, things like that. But then that one moment, so we go, okay, so he's not all bad.
Yeah, there's something in it. He's doing that for a show. He's trying to show people that he's tough. That's why he doesn't tip people. Maybe at work he's an asshole because he believes that's the way he has to be to get ahead. But in the end, we see him feed his cat, or we see him pat his daughter on the head, or he donates to charity secretly, whatever. That's usually the case if somebody is going to go through a major change, and they're going to have to. The major change is interesting because they have to drop that nasty part and get back to the part that we saw that they were really good. So they have to get back to their central core, the central core of the goodness that's inside of everybody. Even bad people have something interesting. You know, we were talking about antagonists a little while ago and how they have to have a human quality. Well, the worst antagonist that you can think of is Adolf Hitler. But he loved his dogs, and his Eva Braun loved him, so there must have been something in him that was actually human. But that makes it even more chilling,
Right.
how nasty he was in the end.
Or women that fall in love with serial killers that
Yeah,
are
there
in
you go.
prison.
Yeah.
And I don't understand that phenomenon, but I know there's been books written and things like that.
Sure.
Yeah, so there's something in them that's charming, probably, and maybe a narcissistic personality disorder, that they know how to push the right buttons and say the right compliments.
But there's something human in them. And you know, I once had a relationship with a woman who had an ex-husband in prison. So her relationship with that man was, she saw something vulnerable in him. And that's the part that she loved at that time. So even though he was a thief and a liar and whatever else he was, I didn't know him personally, she saw something in him that was human, and she was able to love that person. Now, I don't recommend falling in love with people in prison, but you can. People do all the time, just with letters. When people reveal themselves, I believe that people really deep down, nobody's really nasty on purpose. They have to be either taught to be nasty, or they have to have the circumstances of their life press on them so hard that they react to it in the wrong way. They don't stop and think about it, they react. I think that given the choice, most people would be good to other people.
Sure, sure. You know, I had seen a movie about women that fell in love with prisoners as well, and that there was a safety knowing that they wouldn't leave them. They might leave them for another man in prison, but
Well, yeah.
but they wouldn't leave them for another woman. So,
Well, there's
anyway.
that.
yeah, but
aspect
that's a
too.
whole nother video.
Yeah,
But yeah, no, fascinating.
yeah.
Fascinating. I don't even know why I brought that up. That's
Well,
interesting.
I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
Because, you know, that's another aspect. The more depth of character you can get into a movie, the better the movie is going to be. And so if your antagonist has something like what we've been talking about, that makes it more interesting and makes you more conflicted. Do I want the protagonist to win in this situation, or do I want the antagonist? And sometimes in a romantic comedy, you have that exact. We were talking about His Girl Friday earlier on. Well, in His Girl Friday, her fiancé is the sweetest guy in the world. He's not really antagonistic, and we want to root for him. But then Cary Grant. And we see that Cary Grant has a real deep feeling for this woman. Even though he blusters on the outside, he really loves this woman. I mean, when she was filing for divorce, he hired a skywriter to say, "Don't do it."
Wow.
So he had a deep feeling for her, so we understand that. And we feel for him, even though he blusters and orders people around, and she has banter with him that makes him sound like, you know, he's a jackass and everything like that. But he's not. We like him. He's complicated. He's fascinating, and he loves her.
Sure, and a lot of us fall in love with complicated people. It's more of a challenge, and we see that in films, you know, like Bridget Jones' Diary.
There we go.
You know, things like that. She doesn't fall in love with the nice guy. It's usually the more difficult, unattainable person that doesn't treat her well. So it's interesting.
Well, we see a lot of that in women, unfortunately. And,
Yeah. Well, men fall prey to it too.
Men
Yeah.
too. Trust me, I fell in love with a woman that had the ex-husband in prison, so that was a problem.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow, you've lived an interesting life.
Oh, I certainly have.
Yeah. When does a writer have to introduce the main character's flaw?
Well, I believe that in the first visual of the movie, if you can do that, you've really done a good thing, and that will set up the movie. If not in the first visual, then certainly within the first 5 minutes, I would do that. So we understand, what is this person's issue? What is this person's problem? Why is this person not living the perfect life, because they're not. And we need to know why not. So having the flaw introduced in the first visual is a good idea. If we can't do it then, soon will be a good idea. Sooner the better, is my view. And then we understand what they have to overcome in themselves. We understand what their personal journey is. So that's one part of the story, the personal journey that they have to deal with. And then we have to learn about what is the other thing that's going on. And we also need to know that flaw so that we understand at the midpoint that they understand what their flaw is. Because at the beginning, they don't understand what their flaw is. It's only at the midpoint when they understand it. Talking about In and Out again, he did not know that he was gay at the beginning. That's his flaw. He was not self-aware. And it's only at the midpoint that he becomes aware of his own sexuality. Then he has a new goal, and he has to figure out how to deal with that goal. So understanding the flaw is key to understanding the character and understanding the journey that the character goes through in the film.
You say the character's flaw is the answer to why the main character is in the predicament that they're in. Can you explain?
Okay, so the character, we go to movies to see a character change. We go to movies to see emotion, as we've been discussing. So if we understand what the character's flaw is, then we understand the need for change. The character doesn't understand the need for change until the inciting incident comes, and they understand that they need something, they need to do something as a result of that. And then at the end of Act 1, something else happens to them when they figure out that it's not just a need, they actually have to do it right away. They're compelled to make a change, to make a goal and make a plan. But your character doesn't really understand this until the midpoint, when they really understand what their flaw is. They understand they need to change, but they don't know what they need to change. They need to change inside, not just outside. And then once they make that change, then they're able to overcome the major obstacle to their goals. And so the flaw is really a central issue for the character. And if you don't know the flaw of your character, you're going to be in trouble trying to write your film. Because the flaw often also causes the low point. It's because the character's greed, or the character's shyness, or the character's overbearingness, or whatever the character's flaw is, causes the low point. And then the character has to change. And once the character changes, they're able to confront whatever the outside issue is that they have to confront and overcome that outside issue. And then at the end, your character may or may not have been able to completely overcome their flaw, but now they can control it and understand it better and avoid making the mistakes that the flaw pushes them into.
You say write your character's view of how did God create the world?
Mm-hmm. One way to get inside your character is to figure out who that character is. And one way to figure out that character is, what would that character say about God creating the world? Now, if the character is a very religious Christian, they have one way to describe that. If the character is a Buddhist, they have another way to describe that. If the character is an atheist, they have another way to describe that. I ask my students, how would your character describe how God made the world? Or if your character does not believe in God, how did the world come about according to this character? So that would give you an insight into the character and into the character's education, upbringing, just about everything. So we understand that character's way of speaking as well. So that gives us a clue as to the character's dialogue, the character's style of talking.
Right, yeah, you've triggered in me a memory of Louise Hay talking about, she called something Mama's God, and however our mother viewed God is usually how we took it into the world as well.
Oh, that's interesting.
So if we saw a punishing God, then we would feel like we're always going to be punished. So that's fascinating.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I don't remember my mother's view of God at all. That's interesting. I don't think we ever talked about it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, I find that fascinating.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I've never thought about that, but I'm going to think about that now.
Can we talk about status in a conversation? Who maintains one, or are they always shifting?
All right, good idea. Status has so many different influences. For example, if we're talking in a small room, we have a certain tone to our voices, and we have a certain intimacy of discussion, and we have a certain vocabulary. If we're talking in a church, we would have a different vocabulary and a different tone of voice. If we're talking in a stadium, we would have a different tone of voice and a different status when we're talking to another person. If we're talking to a policeman, we talk in a certain way. If the policeman is talking to us, they talk in a certain way. So the status goes like this. But if we look at a scene like in Shakespeare in Love, do you remember Shakespeare in Love?
Oh, yeah, I think so.
There's a scene where Viola comes into her room at her house, and Essex is waiting for her. So when she comes into the room, she has the high status, he has the low status. But as this conversation goes on, the status changes, especially after he kisses her and she slaps him. Then he takes charge of the situation and he becomes the high status and tells her what to do. Status in conversation can change in an instant, and it can change according to the people that you're talking to. So again, I was talking about the cop and a person. Let's talk about a mother and a child. So a mother talking to a 5-year-old child has a lot of status, but a 65-year-old mother talking to a 45-year-old child has a different kind of status, especially if the child is helping the mother move into a retirement home or something like that. So the status has changed over time. Status can change in a conversation. Status can change between lovers if they're talking, if they're arguing, especially. If one reveals something about the other that the other didn't know they knew, that can change the status like that. I know you were cheating. Wow. Status changed instantly. So knowing how that affects the dialogue is really important. So status can change according to education, it can change according to the situation, it can change according to the building that you're in, or if you're outdoors. Status can change if you're at a bar and you're talking about sports and somebody else, let's say a young woman is in the conversation. She has no status in this conversation unless she knows something about sports. But then somebody mentions something about nuclear physics and it turns out she has a degree in nuclear engineering. Status instantly changes. Or if we're talking about, we're at a presentation where the President of the United States is giving a talk and somebody in the audience has a heart attack. All right? And President says, is there a doctor in the house? Instantly, the doctor has more status than the president.
Oh, interesting.
So we would have to change our dialogue to do that, because the doctor could now say, quiet, shut up, and he could tell the president to shut up. You see, that would happen, and that would change the dialogue in the situation. So knowing what the status is and knowing how to change that status can make an interesting conversation.
Sure. I'm thinking, what if, I don't know why this, somebody going into a confessional, forgive me, Father, for I've sinned, and it's been 3 months since my last confession. And really the priest isn't saying much. Mm-hmm. The person is talking themselves either into a problem or out of a problem. And it's almost like their status is changing because they're not really getting too much back from this person.
Then there's the old story. I'm just going to tell you a very short joke if I can remember it well. 2 kids are talking, and one says to the other, you got to go to confession because, you were making out with somebody, or you want to make out with somebody, whatever happened. He goes to confession, and the kid says, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I tried to kiss a girl. He said, what girl? Was it Camille? No. Was it Jody? No. Was it Karen? No. Was it Susan? No. Was it Graciela? No. Oh, okay. Well, I guess we don't know. Who was it? He tells him who it was. He leaves the confession. He has to say his Hail Marys or whatever. He goes to see his friend. His friend said, well, did you tell the guy who you kissed? Well, I did. He said, and so did he forgive you? He said, no, but I got a lot of good leads.
Okay, that's good. I like that. That's good.
Status.
Yeah, okay. I like that.
Status changes.
Good. What does the word rewrite mean to you?
Rewrite means this is the process. It's you have to understand the process of writing a script. No script is perfect the first time out. So it always has to be rewritten in some way or another. The way we define rewriting depends on what needs to be done with the script and who we're writing it for. If we're writing it for ourselves and we want to make the best script possible, what we do is we show it to 2 or 3 people that we trust, our trusted advisors. We get notes from those people, or we get ideas from those people. Not from your mother or your best friend or your husband or your wife, because they're going to say whatever they say, depending on your relationship with that person. They're not going to know what kind of notes to give you. But you have to give it to somebody that you know knows how to give notes. So when you get those notes, you have to think to yourself, is this a note that I can use to make it a better script? Or I don't think so. If you get the same note from 2 people, then you might have to look at it and say, well, maybe I should do something about that. If you get the same note from 3 people, then you do have to make a change, because obviously 3 people have said, there's an issue here and you need to deal with it. So rewriting can be as complicated as tearing it apart and moving the things around, changing the sex of a character, dropping a character, adding a character. All those things will make a major change in your script. Or it can be, you know what? Instead of putting it in the office, why don't you put it in the coffee shop next door? That would be more casual and that would work. Oh, okay, good. So that's a small rewrite. That's almost just what we call a polish. So rewrite can be anything from a page 1 rewrite, which means your structure is all screwed up and your central character is not being driven by his flaw and his goal and doesn't have a good plan. That would be a major rewrite. Or, you know what, we can't shoot it in the Sahara Desert. We're going to have to shoot it on a beach someplace. Can you make some changes to make that work? Okay, that's another kind of a rewrite. Or if you say, I think we need to change that car. He's driving the wrong kind of car. It doesn't show his character enough. So would you do that? That's a very, very small thing. So it can be a very big thing or a very small thing, but you only do a rewrite, unless you're getting paid for it, to improve the script. If you're getting paid for it and you get notes from a producer or the studio or whatever it is, then you have to deal with a different kind of a jujitsu of writing. And that is to take a note that you don't like, that doesn't improve your script, and turn it into a note that does improve your script. And that takes a lot of thinking, and that takes a lot of experience and work to figure out how to make that note work. Or you have to go back to that person and say, after they've read your rewrite, and they say, well, why didn't you change the sex of that character? And you'll say, I tried to do that, but it didn't work in that. Can you tell me how you would make that work? So you have to flip it to the person that's giving you the note to see why they wanted to make that change and if they've got an idea for that change. And usually they will say, no, well, maybe not. Maybe you should leave it that way. That's 9 out of 10 times that's what the person says. When I come back with something like, I couldn't make that work. Do you have an idea for that? And they'll say, no, that's your job. I'll say, well, I tried that. So I'm asking you to help me with that. And usually they'll say, you know what, maybe not.
And are those kind of notes less about skill and technique and more about politics and finessing things?
That's a good question. The good notes are good notes. So those you should pay attention to, the ones that improve your script. The ones that are not going to improve your script, they're usually out of ignorance, because really what the person giving the note is trying to do is either trying to make it for politics. Listen, we can't do anything with alligators anymore because alligators are they're protected, and we have to have something else that we can kill in there that's not an alligator. All right, that's not a bad note. That's an okay note. You can do something with that. However, if they say something like, you know, at the end of that act, he's got to do this and that and the other thing, and you say, well, that would change the whole direction of the movie if we do that. Do you have an idea? Where do you want to take the movie? Is it something else that you want to do with this movie? And you have to ask questions. So Getting notes from a producer is a discussion. Getting the notes from a trusted advisor when you're writing a spec script, that's a different thing. And that is, if they give you a note that you can't make work or you don't think works, then you have to say, well, why did you do that? What's in your mind? And you have to have a discussion and work out what's going to help your script. And if, as compared to a note from a producer, you have to work out what's going to not destroy your script. So, and still make the producer happy. And that's a pretty hard thing to do.
Sure. So then it comes down to finessing and
Yes.
psychology and things. Interesting.
Then you have to apply all the psychology you know to get to where you want to go.
Sure. And then that takes knowing that character's backstory and...
As much as you can.
How long does it take to write a screenplay, and how long does it take to rewrite one?
Well, I've written screenplays. I've written a full feature in a week. I've also written a full feature in 3 months. It depends on the feature and what kind of pressure there is to write it. I wrote one in a week once because the director said, I'm going to the Philippines, I need a script, can you have it by Saturday? So we did that. I was writing with a partner at that time. I've also written, when I was writing scripts for another show, and I can't tell you because it was a non-union show, I was writing 3 10-page scripts a day. So that can be done. So that would make a feature in 3 days. I don't want to do that. I much rather take the time to write out what I need to write out and to rewrite it, because I never turn in the first draft. Never. It doesn't even go to my agent until I've written about 5 or 8 drafts, is about my average. And then my agent will give me notes and then I'll write it again. So how long it takes to rewrite? One time I did a television movie for UPN, which is now the CW. It was a science fiction one. It was their first film, actually shot on digital media. It was called Alien Abduction. We had written it, and I had rewritten it several times and worked on it for months and months and months. We were up in Canada. They changed the executive that was in charge, and the executive that was in charge had some notes and gave me notes which would require a complete rewrite on Friday, and we were supposed to shoot on Monday. So I said, okay, well, so I had to write in 48 hours a big rewrite, something that should have taken me 2 weeks to do, but I did it in 2 days. Sometimes when I've got notes, they'll say, take your time, it's better, we want better rather than faster. So if you get an executive like that, that's a good thing. Better is better than faster. So it could take however long it takes. I mean, you never know. It depends on how much rewriting has to be done.
I think you've said too that if you don't want to rewrite something, think of the reader. They might not want to read it. If you're not willing to put in the time to do numerous rewrites, and they might not even want to read your first draft.
Correct. You have to understand that you're writing a document that has to bring a movie into somebody's head. The first somebody is the development executive. The next somebody is a director and a producer. The next somebody is 150 to 5,000 people that work on a movie. If your movie has a lot of special effects, you could have as many as 5,000 people working on your movie. So they have to be able to see what's in your head. So you have to be able to put what's in your head on a piece of paper so that they can take that piece of paper and see in their head what you saw in your head. That's a skill. That's definitely a skill, and that does take practice, and that takes study, and that takes writing and rewriting and rewriting. So it's not an easy thing to do, which is why they pay so much for it. For a really good script, even for a Writers Guild minimum script, it costs as much as it costs for a Mercedes-Benz top-of-the-line car. That's a lot of money, and they want to make sure that they can see the movie in that script. So you have to write in such a way that they can visualize the setting, the people, and that they can hear the voices of those people. And that the voices are differentiated. that your protagonist sounds different than your antagonist, and that the central emotional relationship person sounds different from everybody else, so that everybody's got a different voice, so they can hear those voices by the way you write your dialogue.
What is your rewriting process?
Well, first I pound my head on the floor for a couple of times. And then, no, my rewriting process, it depends. If I'm getting notes from people and I'm writing a spec script, a spec script is a script I'm writing, nobody's paying for it yet, that I'm hoping to sell, then my process can take some time. I'll think about it, I'll think about their notes, I'll try to make them work if I think they're going to improve the story. Sometimes I've gotten notes where actually I finished a film, I had a rough cut, showed the rough cut, somebody, I could see that it was slow. Somebody came up to me and said, look, let's talk about this because I think there's a problem here. And he said, you have to do this more cinematically, you have to intercut this and you have to cut that and do that. He gave me some really good suggestions and I said, you are so right, I hate you now. Now I have to make major changes in this film.
Okay.
And I did it, and it was a much better film for that. Sometimes people give you notes that just don't make sense. And that happens, and you have to differentiate. You have to stop and think, do I really mean to say what they're telling me I want to say, or do I really mean to say something else? Is it something that I need people to like? Because not everybody's going to like Barbie. Even though Barbie was a very good film, not everybody's going to like Barbie. And I know people that hated it. There are reasons to like it, and there are reasons to hate it. So not every suggestion is going to be good. Not every reader is going to understand your script. Not every reader is going to see, in reading the script, see what Barbie turned out to be. So it took some visionary people to understand what Greta Gerwig had in her mind, which was this big explosion of color and people and things that you didn't see in Oppenheimer, for example, which came out at the same time. Very, very different films, very different, but both immensely successful. So writing for the audience of one, and then the second audience of one, and the third audience of one, and then the audience of 145 for an independent film, or 5,000 for a big special effects film, that's a skill.
Sure. And some people might like a smaller story, like Lady Bird, which I absolutely love.
Which was terrific. Lady Bird was a terrific film, but not everybody's going to like that film.
That's
Certainly
true.
Not everybody that liked Barbie is going to like Lady Bird.
Yeah.
And not everybody that liked Lady Bird is going to like Barbie. People write different films at different times in their lives as well. And you want to be able to do that. And you want to be able to write a big film or a small film.
Sure.
Whatever you want to write as a writer, what's important to you. On the one hand, on the other hand, you have to be able to write what somebody wants you to write. If you're hired to write out of the blue, somebody says, look, I need the next version of the Mattel world or the next version of the Marvel world, and it has to star this guy, and they have to be in a big fight on Mars. Can you write that? And you'll say, sure. Okay, let's talk about it. And you will write that. If they say, look, I have $10 million, go make the film you want to write. That never happens, but okay, let's say it did happen. It happens to some people because let's say you're, Christopher Nolan. Let's say you're Christopher Nolan, and Christopher Nolan comes to you and says, look, I need $50 million to write a film, to do a film. And you'll say, great, when can you have the first script? That's all you'll say, because he's made tons of money and he's done great films.
Sure. Yeah. Or again, comparing Memento to Oppenheimer, right?
Exactly.
Different audiences.
So different, so different.
Sure.
But that's how he made his name. Actually, he wrote that with his brother. So that's how he made his name. And that's how he had the ability to say, okay, I want to make another film. And would you fund me? Because it made money.
Sure.
That's the key. If it makes money, you can get money.
What does it mean to read for structure?
Okay, well, when I say when you rewrite, when you finish the rewrite, you have to read over the script several times. And one of the times is you have to read it for structure to make sure that all the wheels are on the car, and that the car has the steering wheel, the car has the accelerator and the brake. In the case of a film, you have to make sure that the structure makes sense, that you have the 7 points, that they move the story, that all the scenes move the story. And scenes have to have structure as well. Scenes and sequences have to have the structure. So every scene has a 7-point structure, although we don't always see all the points in that scene. Sometimes you can leave off the first part of the ordinary life. You can leave off the return to normal life and just have those things to keep you in suspense. You can even leave off the final challenge if we know how it's going to turn out, or we find out how it turns out by going to the next scene. And they do this a lot in television to hold you over a commercial. So we don't actually go into the final challenge. We just approach the final challenge and we see what it's going to be. And then the next scene will show the person after the final challenge, and we understand what happened in that. However, if the final challenge is an important thing to do, for example, if it's a Jackie Chan movie and the final challenge has to be a fight, well, we're going to want to see the final challenge. But we don't necessarily need to see the return to normal life. If we see him in the next scene doing something else and we know that he's okay and the normal life has come about and everything is all right. But there were 7 points in that scene. We just didn't see them all. Sometimes you can even leave out the middle. There's all points in a scene you can do that. In a sequence, you can do the same thing. A sequence has a beginning, a middle, and an end. 7 points in a sequence made up of scenes that each have 7 points, whether we see them or not. So a sequence has a good structure. If the sequence has a good structure and you have several sequences, and some people structure their movies in 7 or 8 sequences. That's another approach to a movie, which I don't necessarily agree with, but it works. If you have the sequences have structure, then your film will have structure. And if your film has structure, you'll be satisfied. And the idea is, at the end of the movie, is the reader or the audience satisfied with what happens in the film? They don't have to be happy. They don't have to be sad. They just have to be satisfied that it made sense. This is the way it should be. And everything is okay at the end.
I would imagine doing a structure test on something like Memento would be difficult, or not?
Well, as I described earlier on, Memento has structure 2 ways. It has a backward structure and a forward structure, depending on which part of the film you're watching. If you're watching the colorized version, not colorized, but it's in color, if you watch that, it's backwards, but if you flip it, it's forwards, and it has 7 points. If you watch the black and white version, it goes 7 points on the nose all the way through. So it's perfectly structured. You just have to know how to look at it to see the structure. And it was interesting that he did it backwards, but he did it, I don't know if he wrote it backwards at first or he edited his script to do it backwards, but it worked. And if it didn't have the right structure, it wouldn't have worked.
How does a writer know they are done with their draft?
That's one of the hardest questions a writer has to ask. There's only one way to know if you're done with a script, if you're done with your rewrite, and that is to reread it several times and to figure out if there's anything more you can add to it. If there's nothing more you can add to it to improve it, then it's done. If there are other things you can add to it to improve it, then you have to continue to rewrite it.
Okay, sounds logical. What if the writer thinks that the draft is done, but they're getting feedback from other people that doesn't seem done? Where does that shift take place?
It depends on who's giving the feedback and how they're giving it. So as I described before, if you have your trusted advisors telling you and they agree that it's not done, then you need to look at it and say, well, why? What's not done? What would you add to it? And create a dialogue with that person or those people to figure out what needs to be the next step. If it's the producer that says it's not done, and this happens all the time, then you have to say, okay, if the producer's smart, the producer will say, well, the problem is we don't have a strong enough character, the character is not dynamic enough, or the character is not active enough. He's very passive. And I've given notes like this all the time. I just did one and gave a note that way, and that character had to change. That person had to change that character to make that character drive the story instead of being driven by the story. There's a very big difference there. So if a producer's giving you notes, they have the paycheck. So you have to somehow or another make sure the producer is satisfied by the script, or they'll take it away. And that's happened. That's happened to me. That happens to every writer. It's taken away and somebody else finishes the script. That happened in Shakespeare in Love. Well, it wasn't actually taken away. The Mark Norman couldn't finish the script because he had another obligation. But the script was not done. It needed to be rewritten, and he didn't have the time to do it. So Tom Shepard came in and finished the script. So you never know how it's going to be, and you never know who you're going to deal with. But you know, at a certain point, when you can't make any changes that improve the script, you're done with it. But if somebody else tells you something about it that sparks to you, and then you say, oh yeah, that would make it better, then it's time to do a rewrite. If they tell you something that is not going to make it better, then you have to figure out a way to deal with that. To either say no, if it's one of your trusted advisors, you can say, that's not exactly what I want to do with the script. Or if it's the producer that's paying you, you have to find out what they would see, what they would do to make it better.
How many times do you think that happens in a professional writer's life where their work is taken away from them or their work for hire and someone else will finish it?
How many times does that happen? Every day. It's happened to me. It's happened to me on, well, it's only been taken away once. But on writing for television, often they'll say, you know, we have to do this or we have to do that, and I'll have to make some changes. Or what's also happened to me is they make changes on the set, have nothing to do with me, so I don't even know what's going on. When I was working on The Twilight Zone, and they were shooting in Canada, they would make changes on the set and not consult with us. Or when they were shooting in Canada, it was when the writer's strike in that year came about, 1987, I think it was, 87 or 88, when they were shooting in 88. They would make changes, sometimes changes that were not good changes, but we just had to live with it because we couldn't make any changes. We were not allowed to make any writing changes because we were on strike. So things happen and you just have to go with the flow. It's not like writing a novel where you just deal with probably one person making the changes or asking you to make changes. That would be your editor or your trusted advisors. I mean, my latest novel, I showed around to 3 or 4 people. They read it. Some of them had some changes. Some were good. One change came up over and over again. And I said, okay, I'm going to have to make a change in the book. And I did that change. And it was a better book for it. So sometimes that can be very positive. As it turned out, my editor, my publisher, didn't have any changes to make. Once I turned it in, that was it. And they published it. So it's out now, as a matter of fact. It's called Lies, All Lies, and you can get it on Amazon.com.
And what's it about?
It's about, let me see if I can distill it for you here. It's about a mid-30s actor, director, writer who is standing poolside at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, soaking wet, holding a pair of tickets to the Emmys that night in 2019, and he doesn't know who he is, where he is, or who is that woman in a string bikini next to him talking to him. And he has to figure out who he was, who he wants to be, and then he has to make those changes to make that happen.
Wow. And are these metaphorical questions, or he has amnesia?
He has amnesia.
Oh, he has amnesia.
Yeah,
Okay.
as a result of an accident.
Okay.
And a trauma, personal trauma. So, and possibly drug use and alcohol use. I mean, he was a bad person in some ways, and got himself into trouble. But he was good enough to get the life that he had.
Sure.
And he was he goes to the Emmys that night. He wins 2 Emmys, so he was good in his field. But he realizes that he was bad as a person, So he has to make some changes. So that's the process of the novel, is him coming to grips with who he was, figuring out who he was, figuring out what his relationship was with this woman, with the other women in his life, with his children, with his parents, with his boss, with the other people in the sitcom that he's working in, with all those people, and figuring out what to do with his life after understanding who he was and how he wanted to change.
How does a writer read their screenplay for conflict?
A writer reads a screenplay for conflict by looking at the goal of a person and what are the barriers to that goal. And if there are no barriers to that goal, they have to create a barrier to that goal. And that creates the conflict. Now, the barrier could be a person, it could be an actual physical barrier, it could be nature, it could be the ocean, it could be a relationship that's going wrong. Whatever the barrier is to the goal, that person has to confront that barrier, and that's what creates the conflict.
So we want to establish that when? You said fairly soon into the actual writing of the screenplay.
Right. We would, well, it definitely has to be established by the end of the first act. What is the goal and what are the barriers to the goal? And we have to see the barriers in each scene as well. Even in the first part of the story, when we're just establishing who the character is and what the situation is, we have to see barriers in every scene. And the barrier can be, like we were talking about earlier, riding a bicycle down the street. It could be potholes. It could be a pedestrian jumping in front of the bicycle. It could be somebody jumping onto the bicycle. It could be a car hitting the bicycle. It doesn't matter what the barrier is, or it creates a conflict that your central character has to overcome. And this happens throughout the film. Usually there's a major barrier, a major antagonist that's preventing your character from reaching his goal. But it could be somebody that's not somebody, a larger issue. For example, it could be the war. Let's say it's Nazi Germany. The barrier is the other army. It's not an individual, but it is a barrier that creates conflict that your central character has to overcome. And we have to see some sort of conflict in every scene, or we don't have really a scene.
Can you give us examples of how writers can add conflict to scenes that are lacking conflict?
Yes. The conflict doesn't always have to be big conflict. For example, let's say that you and I are talking about what we're going to have for dinner. And you say, oh, I'd really like Mexican food tonight. And I say, you know what? I've had so much Mexican food this week, I'd rather have Chinese food. Conflict, different goals. We have different goals. So we have to resolve that conflict. How do we resolve that conflict? We talk about it. Well, why don't you want to have any Mexican food? I've had it every night this week. Why don't you want to have Chinese food? Because it gives me hives, or whatever it is. How about if we have sushi? So a resolution has to come up. You have to make a suggestion. Now, you can apply that to any situation. The conflict doesn't have to be big conflict. It doesn't have to be a fight. It can be anything, as long as there's a difference of a goal. If you have different goals, then you have conflict. And you have to resolve that conflict one way or the other. Now, in every scene in the movie, doesn't mean you resolve that conflict. Sometimes you lose. You just lose. You don't achieve the goal of that scene, and you have to move on. Or obviously you don't achieve the goal of the movie, because if you did, that'd be the end of the movie. So in the midpoint or any other point in the scene, in the movie, you have to understand that the conflict has to be small enough that your central character is going to survive, and big enough so that your character doesn't reach his ultimate goal. But there has to be conflict in every scene.
Do you find sometimes if you give a new writer a note, let's say a student, there needs to be more conflict, that they add way too much than the scene warrants?
Well, yeah, that doesn't happen very often. Usually they have to search for what the conflict is, or they will dump the scene. And I recommend if they can't figure out the conflict of the scene, just take it out and see if you can make the movie without that. If you can't make the movie without that, then put in the dinner suggestion, or put in clothing suggestion. I hate that blouse. you've got to change your blouse.
Sure.
And she'll say, well, what's wrong with this blouse? It's got nice lace on it, and it's got a nice neck on it, and my arms are out there. And so there has to be a discussion. It's not a big thing, but it tells you who those people are.
Right. My ex-girlfriend used to wear that blouse. And that's the blouse that she wore when she went to Vegas with her ex-husband.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a reason not to like that blouse.
Right. Because I just thought, you know, the dinner, okay, if we took the dinner scenario, what if there wasn't enough conflict in that? It was, I want this one, you want that one. Okay, well, it's not really too much of an argument.
Then we don't need that scene.
You don't need that scene.
It's not moving the story.
Okay.
It's not telling us anything new about those characters. But if it's telling us something new about those characters, like, I can't stand Mexican food because it gives me gas, and when I have gas, I get angry,
Right.
that tells us something about the character. If it's, well, I just had too much Mexican food this week, that doesn't tell you very much about the character. But it does tell you something. Why have they been eating so much Mexican food that week? Well, because I can't afford anything else. I have to eat rice and beans because I can't afford anything else. Then that tells you something about that character. So in that case, you can keep that scene. If it tells us something about the character and there's a conflict there, then we can keep that scene. If it doesn't tell you anything about the character, we have to dump it.
Or when we go out to Mexican, I love it, but you have 3 margaritas and then you change on me.
Right.
And you swore you were just going to have Diet Coke.
Right. Well, there's an argument. And that tells you something about that character.
Right.
So
There we go.
There we go.
We're raising the stakes, which leads us to raising the stakes. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah. If everything is easy and it's at the same level as we're going through the script, then it gets boring. So it has to be harder and harder and harder to overcome the barriers in every scene until we get to the final challenge, which is the biggest scene of the movie, and that is in the 3rd act, where your character has to overcome the hardest thing to overcome, whatever the protagonist is, if it's the volcano, if it's the ocean, if it's the swordsman, if it's the rifleman, if it's the wife who's about to leave, whatever it is, that person has to overcome whatever that big barrier is. If we have that big barrier in the 1st act, then the rest of it's going to be downhill and we're not going to be interested. So we have to have rising action, more and more difficulties as we go along. Otherwise, we waste it. You know, if we have it early on, then there's no reason to see the rest of the movie. It's over.
Okay, so if let's suppose there's, I don't know, alien invasion, don't put that closer to the beginning of the movie, or in the midpoint, you would be more toward the end because that's what they were scared of the entire time? Or?
No, not necessarily.
No?
You can have your alien invasion as the inciting incident. It's how they react to the alien invasion. We don't see them fighting it yet. We just see the aliens invaded. So now what do the people do about that? And they try something, they try shooting at it, it didn't work. They try setting off a bomb, that didn't work. They try setting off an atomic bomb, that didn't work. So what's the final challenge going to be? Well, I don't know what that is because I'm just making this up as I'm going along, but it has to be bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger to deal with the alien invasion. But the alien invasion is the inciting incident. The goal and plan is to get rid of the alien invasion. The plan might be we're going to send missiles against it, or the alien invasion could be a bacteria. And that's a whole different thing. So how do we deal with that? And how do we deal with it in ascending order? How does it get bigger and bigger and bigger? That's this problem that the screenwriter has to solve. And let me just say one more thing about screenwriting is that screenwriters solve problems. That's what they do. And there's a set of problems that come with every kind of story and every kind of person in the story. And the screenwriter has to solve problems. One of the things I did with my book recently is I wrote the character into a corner at the end of every chapter. And I had to solve the problem. I didn't even know the answer to the problem. I had to solve the problem in the next chapter. And then I wrote him into another corner so that I had to solve the problem. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until I solved the problem.
I love that. So, you've talked about giving things space or whatever. With this writing them into the corner and you didn't know, at what point would you start to figure out? Would they tell you what was going to happen?
That's a funny thing to ask, because you're so right. Sometimes the character will talk to me and dialogue comes out that I just, where did that come from? Or things happen, and you'll see, if you read the book, you'll see there's there's a very big surprise in one character that I didn't know until I wrote it. The word just came out. I thought, whoa, that surprised me. And that means that I knew that character and I knew that situation well enough to write it without even predicting it. It's hard to describe what happens. The brain takes over and you don't even know how it's going. Sure. I wasn't following an outline in that particular case. So when you're writing a script, you should know generally what's going on. I mean, you have your beat sheet, but you should be open to surprises as well, because a surprise can help you make it a little bit more interesting. And those surprises should be difficulties whenever possible. Something that's hard, something that makes it harder for your character. If it's something that makes it easy for your character, dump it. If it's a coincidence that makes it easy for your character, don't do it. But if it's a coincidence that makes it harder for your character, then do it.
So whether it's a novel or a screenplay, write them into corners, and the writer themselves should really not have a general idea of how they're going to get out of the situation?
Well, I wouldn't say shouldn't have. They should have most of the time, but allow themselves to be surprised. One person describes screenwriting as this. There's a person that climbs into a tree because there's a dangerous situation, and then you throw stones at that person until they figure out how to get down from the tree without getting killed. So this is what you do in your screenplay. You write a situation, you try to figure out how this person has to overcome each barrier along the way, but be open to creating new barriers or new ways to get out of those barriers. Instead of jumping down from the tree, maybe he climbs higher in the tree. Maybe he breaks off a branch and uses it as a spear. But let your character evolve while you're writing the character. Then you can go over it in your second draft or third draft and fix whatever needs to be fixed and set up whatever needs to be set up. Maybe you didn't set up that he knows how to make a bow and arrow out of a tree. You didn't set that up, but you showed that. You go back and you rewrite and you show him experimenting with a bow and arrow, or playing with a bow and arrow, or taking archery lessons, or whatever it is. And then that gives him the idea when he's in the tree to make a bow and arrow so that he can stop the person throwing stones at him. So you have to be open to invention as you go along. And sometimes your character will tell you what that invention should be. Sometimes they don't, but then you have your outline to proceed with.
If you don't hear that character voice, is this the wrong character for you?
Probably you haven't developed that character enough. That means probably the best thing to do would go back to your bio and figure out who that character really is. And if the character is not talking to you, then maybe you have the wrong character. Maybe you have the wrong story. You know, I haven't written to the end of every idea that I've gotten. Sometimes I will abandon a script when I just can't figure it out. And that's okay. You know, we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to achieve perfection with every script we write. Sometimes we just write crap. And sometimes we do that on purpose. Sometimes we have to do that because of the nature of the story we're doing or the nature of the program we're writing for. And I've done that. But sometimes you just write yourself in a corner and can't get out of it. And if that happens, sometimes you just have to give up. Now, if you're being paid to do that, that's a whole different story. Then you talk to people and you go back to your producer or the person that hired you and you say, look, I'm having a problem here. And you have to be honest and say, I wrote him into a corner and I can't get out. Do you have any ideas? And they may or may not like that idea that you come to them with and asking them for ideas, but tough. If you can't get out of it, you turn in a half a script, you're going to be up the creek anyway. So you might as well ask for help when you need it. Or you ask one of your trusted advisors, look, they want me to do this, but I wrote myself into a corner and I can't get out of it. What do you think? What can I do? And you talk it over. And eventually you're going to get an idea that's going to get you out of it.
What can you teach us about changing oneself midlife?
Wow. Well, that's what my new book is all about, actually. Lies, All Lies. You have to look at yourself and be able to look at yourself and say, am I happy where I am? Am I doing the things that I wanted to do? Would the child that I was be proud of the adult that I've become? And if that is the case, or if that isn't the case, then you have to say, I've got to make some changes. And how do I make those changes? Well, that's a product of research, investigation, looking into religion, looking into philosophy, looking into your friends and asking them, I've got a problem. I'm drinking too much. What do I do about it? I can't seem to stop. How do I deal with that? Especially, that's why people go to Alcoholics Anonymous, to ask. I realize I have a problem. I don't know how to stop it. Can you help me? So asking for help is a good thing to do at that stage. Self-examination is a good thing to do. Research is a good thing to do. Because I believe, and that's what I say in my book, you can change at any point in your life once you realize that you need to change. To be the person that you wanted to be the person that the child that you were would be proud of. And if you can do that, then you can be a real person. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I watched a young woman do a YouTube video on becoming a better version of yourself, and she wrote it as a character. I think she might have made it a video game character, but she really was saying that she wanted to become a better version of herself.
Good.
And so she thought it'd be easier if she wrote it from this point of view of a character. And I just thought it was fascinating. It was like a half-hour video essay that she did. Do you think some life stages are easier to change ourselves? Or I know you talked about midlife, and this is in your book, Lies, All Lies, right?
It's a midlife crisis.
Okay.
And he's a little young for it. He's in his mid to late 30s.
Oh, yeah.
But still, he's in a position where he has to change. I don't know, I've made major changes in my life, like standing at the blackboard, realizing that I'm not supposed to be here, and made a change, or moving from one country to another. I mean, I lived in Europe for 6 years. I left London after living there 4 years. I made a major change. I made major changes in my relationships. When you come to that place where you think, this relationship is not working out, and it's because of me, or because of her, or because of him. I mean, whoever it is. I mean, I had a major change in a friend's relationship. He brought about that change. It was his cack-assed idea about what I was doing that I said, no, we're going to cut it off here. Things happened in your life, and you have to be open to change. Otherwise, you're just sitting there on the couch watching TV.
True. And there are times for that.
Yeah.
And maybe wallowing. And then there's times when it's so painful to be in that situation that you've got to
change.
Get out of that.
But not everybody's got to make those changes. Some people have perfect lives, or they think they have a perfect life, and that's good enough. That's fine. Some people have good lives from start to finish, never have to change. I don't know any of those people, but I imagine there are those people.
Do you think certain areas are easy to change? You said you've lived so many different countries. Is it easier to make a change in LA versus a small town in the South?
Well, that's a good question, because I live in a small town in the South right now, and I'm enjoying it. But I made a major change in the way I lead my life, because I don't have to go to work every day. I can work or not work. People say, are you retired? Well, I retired from teaching, but I didn't retire from writing. So I write when I want to write, and I don't write when I don't want to write. So that's a change in my lifestyle. I would say that it's easier to do outside of LA. LA is good. There's a lot of pressure here. And to be somebody, and to be somebody big in show business or whatever business you're in here, I'm shocked. I lived in LA for over 40 years. But coming back here, every time I come back here, I think, how did I do this? How did I live here? Just driving today, it took me an hour to get to my first place in Westlake Village. The traffic was stop and go all the way out there. To get here was very easy. And that is a pressure that's everywhere in Los Angeles. There's also a pressure I've seen to show, and I just noticed this, people's cars. We define ourselves with our cars. And I see so many more Mercedes, BMWs, Jaguars, big SUVs, Audis, sports cars. I saw a Lamborghini today on the road. We don't see that. We rarely see a BMW or a Mercedes. They're there, but we rarely see them. We see a lot of pickup trucks. People don't, they show themselves here, they have to have a certain veneer, and the car is part of the veneer. We don't see that so much in the South, or where I am in the South. So, yeah.
Sure.
I'm more comfortable there. I don't feel a lot of pressure there.
Sure, and I think certain ages lend to needing to compete, and also certain cultures,
Yes.
I think, have a lot of pressure on being able to show one another up.
Yeah.
And show that, kind of I'm a first among equals.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Well,
I think
that
that's
happens
what's
in
left.
families too.
Yeah,
Families and
absolutely.
social groups and professions, and I wouldn't want to be. Right now, it's a very tough time to be in show business. It's very tough because of the shrinking of the streaming industry. Or if you're in finance, something like that, it's a very tough time to be that, and you have to work really, really hard. It might not be good for you. You might not be good at it. I mean, there's a lot of pressure going on here.
But on the flip side too, I think there's people that they can't not compete, and that's just in their
Right.
DNA.
That's fine,
There's
too.
nothing wrong with that. And I think it really, maybe you need to experience some of that to realize you don't want it or you're done with it.
Conflict is necessary in every situation. And if you have conflict in that kind of a situation, that can either bring out the best in you or you retire. I mean, by retire, I mean go away from it. So if you're in a profession where there's a lot of pressure on you to succeed, or you feel pressure, or you need to be competitive, that's fine. But if you don't need to be competitive and you're in a competitive situation, maybe it's time to change your situation.
And is that something that when you felt that you wanted to leave Los Angeles for whatever your reasons were, did you take sort of a deep sigh of relief? It felt like a natural part of your journey?
Yes, I was good with that, and it was a natural part of my journey. My wife had a problem with it because she was a very high performing TV producer and was ready to retire, but didn't realize how different it was going to be. She likes to say, I like North Carolina, but I left a big life in Los Angeles. She was the executive producer of E! News at one time, and then the senior producer on Inside the Issues with Alex Cohen on Spectrum, and left that. And, she knew everybody in town and that stuff, and we had a pretty big life, and she had friends and family here, and so did I, as a matter of fact. One of the reasons I'm here now is to see friends and family. So it was harder for her to make that adjustment. But now she has, and she's enjoying it more. She hasn't come to the total acceptance of the new life that I have, but she will, because she is now exploring more people and things to do. So it's okay, I'm done.
And lastly, and then we'll just end it here, but the addiction to adrenaline. I think too, being in LA, there's so many adrenaline highs.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Whether it's a car chase on the news, or just the highs and lows are very, very noticeable here. How is that to be somewhere where maybe it's not that way?
Well, I like to say that I live in a development that's 3 miles from the University of North Carolina. From that development, it's a mature development. It's about 25 years old. We live in a very nice house. It's walkable to a coffee shop. There's a town square where there's just about everything you need. 4 restaurants. There's a pediatric clinic. There's a dental clinic. There's a dermatology clinic. There's a bar. There's all kinds of stuff there. There's a movie theater. I can walk to there. On the other hand, if I get in the car and I drive across the highway that leads into where we are, in less than 5 minutes, I'm in the country. So I can decompress in the country. I can go actually in the other direction, 5 minutes in the country. In another direction, I can be downtown Chapel Hill with all the students and the university and everything else, if I want to do that. So I have those opportunities. I can do whatever I want to do. So I feel more comfortable there because I can make those choices. If you're in Los Angeles, to get to the country, how long would it take you to do that?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, it'd take you an hour at least to get out there to past Woodland Hills into Calabasas. You probably have to get to Calabasas to see country. Don't have to do that in North Carolina. Actually, I look across the street. There's a park across the street. It's really a woods, just right across the street. So it's different. It's calmer, and I'm able to focus. So what I do is I walk up to the cafe. I do a couple of things. I check out my email, et cetera, and then I write for a couple of hours. And I know people there, and I'm able to talk if I want to talk, or if I say I need to work, I work. And then I go home and I have my lunch, and I have my day. I can do whatever I want to do. This is a good thing.
Sounds nice.
Yeah, life has turned out pretty good.
That's great.
And I have my grandson.
Oh, nice.
And I'll show you a picture of him if you want to see that, but that's a separate issue.
What if he wants to be a writer?
I would recommend him starting right now or doing that. If he wants to do that, whatever he wants to do, I'll encourage him. But he has to really want to be a writer. It's a tough life. It's a very up and down life. Right now he wants to be a trucker. He's nice. 2.5.
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah. So there's that.